Hello, welcome. This is Nadia Cater with the Nemea podcast, Adult Ed in the Field. I'm here today with an old friend, a former colleague, and Brooklynite, Tim Berrigan. Hi, Tim.
Hey, how are you?
Good. I pronounced your name right?
Yeah,
Okay,
yeah.
just making sure. I was so worried for a second. So yes, Tim. So I want to, what really made me want to talk to you today, especially since we're so, now we're in different states. I'm in New Mexico, you're in New York. Was just I saw you posted online a slow reveal graph routine by you. And let me just break down this bio real quick, right? Tim is an educator, poet, and part-time astrologer. He currently serves as the site manager at Brooklyn Public Library's New Lots Adult Learning Center. Right? He recently became a New York State teacher leader in mathematics and is the recipient of an NYSED CUNY mini grant, which he used to create a collection of slow reveal graphs that include suggested questions, extensions, and further reading. Ooh, look at you. Man, you've been doing so much since I moved. This is really exciting. Can you talk a little bit just about, because in New Mexico we don't have a learning center through libraries. I know some states have them and some don't. So New Mexico is one of the ones that don't. But could you just kind of explain just a little bit on what is a learning center of a library system? Like, what does that look like?
Sure. So they're often all like they have their own floor in a branch, a branch of the Brooklyn Public Library. They can be sometimes in a basement or in like a second floor, something like that. And there's sort of a mixture of like full-time library staff who, are like kind of library employees. And then through grants with the state or, like federal grants like WIOA, there will be part-time, literacy employees, part-time literacy zone employees. I don't know if literacy zone's a New York thing, but has case managers, program assistants, data assistants. So, depending on the time of day when you'd walk in, there could be ABE groups, and those ABE groups are held, in the center. They are often conducted small groups with volunteer tutors. The volunteer tutors go through the tutor training, but then when they get to their branch, there's a literacy advisor, which is my previous role. Literacy advisor supports the tutors, observes the tutors, helps them with materials, helps them with instructional routines or sequences. And then in another part of the center, there often could be like a WIOA high school equivalency class. We have those case managers, so sometimes they bring in people to help with resumes, people to help with housing, information about colleges through the CUNY system. So I've never really worked at another adult ed program, so I don't know how that's different or similar, but it's all based through the library, so it definitely has like that kind of community feel where people can just walk in and ask questions, whether it's like want to learn English or I want to work on literacy or I want my GED or my branch, like downstairs, they told me you all could help me with a resume or apply to a job. So, you know, all those are sort of at play, sometimes with more emphasis towards one, depending on the day and the time.
Okay. Yeah, so I'm seeing like it's very similar to setups and other. I mean, as of right now, I've only worked directly in two programs. I did work with the BPL with you. That's how we met. And then now I'm working for a nonprofit, but it kind of seems like we're similar in that the adult, and correct me if I'm wrong, the adult learning center is kind of like its own entity in the library.
Yeah, I mean, it's like part of the library. There's a whole literacy department in BPL proper, the way there's like, an outreach department and immigration services department. So yeah, it's just kind of one of the arms or one of the things in the broader institution that BPL does. But yeah, it's sort of a smaller branch. I don't know the exact number. I want to say BPL has about 50 branches, and there's only 5 learning centers. So,
Wow.
most branches don't have a learning center, and the learning centers are typically sort of strategically placed in communities where there will be need.
Right, that makes sense.
Yeah.
Wow. Yeah. So, how long have you been working with the BPL?
I feel like with like COVID, time is, tricky, but I think this is my 6th year. Um, so that would mean I started 2018, maybe 2000, maybe 2017 actually.
Oh,
Um,
wow.
so yeah, that like, worked as a literacy advisor at the Flatbush Learning Center, which is where I met you, and then changed to a floating literacy advisor, which meant I was working at all the different learning centers, and then COVID hit, so I was doing a lot of setting up sort of the learning management stuff and helping teachers teach online. And then this spring there was or I guess the past spring there was an opening for a site manager job, which means someone who's sort of running all the operations at one of those 5 learning centers, and I applied to that. So I've been doing that since like April.
Oh, wow. So, yeah. So you kind of like you've been around a little bit by that previous job being the floating, so you could see how different each branch is and just all those different employees. And now you're kind of in your own little galaxy, right?
Yes.
That's cool. Um, so but I know that you've been doing other things outside of the BPL. Can you talk a little bit about that?
With like the grants and like the teacher leader stuff.
Yeah, what is a teacher leader? It sounds fancy, but I don't know what it means.
Yeah, I mean, I don't fully know what it means. Like, all I know is that, so when I got to BPL, my background was like, in poetry, but then I got jobs writing as a writing instructor at colleges, community colleges, 4-year colleges. And when I got to BPL, I thought that was going to be kind of my focus. It was like the literacy program. But then a lot of people were coming in who needed help on the HSC with math. And I didn't have much background in math.
Hmm.
I had no background in math at all. So at least in New York, everyone has to do, I'm not sure the exact number, 12 or 14 hours of PD.
Yeah.
Um, so I just started going to like every math PD I could. And luckily, Eric Appleton and Mark kind of being nervous about people's last names. I'm not sure how to say his last name. Trishkowski.
Uh-huh.
They're really, really cool, sort of curriculum teacher supports at CUNY, and they run a lot of the math workshops, and they kind of showed me like a whole approach to math. Um, that was a lot different than the way I learned math, a lot different than like procedural math, a lot of low floor, high ceiling activities, a lot of integrated activities connecting math to social studies and things like that. And so I just kept going to those and kept working with students. And as you said, have been around long enough. Definitely during COVID was teaching a lot of math. How for whatever reason the way it sort of shook out, our first sort of wave of teachers, who didn't want to teach online. A lot of them were math teachers, so I stepped in and was just kind of one, as you know, that feeling like one week ahead of the group on like what we were doing. I would be like,
Yeah.
okay, next week we're going to do this. And in my head, I'd be like, I'm going to learn how we do that. And then the interim. Um, so at one point, I think, it was not, yeah, it was about a year ago, around this time, a year ago. My boss was like, they're doing the teacher leader stuff again, which means you go up to Albany for like an institute, they call it. It's pretty intensive. It's like 2 or 3 days of like, a lot of math and a lot of just learning different approaches and instructional routines. And it's with teachers all throughout the state. So it was like me, a woman from the Bronx who works in the DOE, but then like people from Rochester and Buffalo. And then after that, you're like a quote teacher leader, which means then you can start facilitating those PDs for your region. So my region's, New York City. So after doing that, now we'll actually host PDs with teachers from other organizations and institutions in New York. So that's sort of like the process. So I've had times when you go to one of those PDs and wonder like, how do you get to be the person who does the PDs? Like that's what you have to do.
Oh, okay. So they train you, then you're trained, then you train someone else, and then they train someone else. Is that how it is?
Well, it's more like those PDs I do in the city are for like, slow reveal or the balancing elements of algebra, and then just like 20 math teachers or 20 whomever teachers from the city show up. But to train the teacher leaders, that's happening in Albany, and there's just a few people who do that.
Oh, okay, I see. Because at first it almost sounded like you were getting at a pyramid scheme.
Sure, yeah.
Like the math PD pyramid scheme, and everyone's
Yes.
just
Yeah, I mean, there definitely is an element of like, I think, they are kind of always looking for new people to be teacher leaders. So there's more people who can do PDs and things like that. But I think a little less, insidious than a pyramid scheme.
no,
There's no cost of entry or anything.
it's for the greater good. It's that
Yes.
people at math. That's kind of amazing though. So you're admitting on recording that you are not a math person, but now you
Sure.
are a teacher leader in math.
Yeah, and actually, it's interesting you say that because I do a lot of the hiring and I'm part of that hiring process, and sometimes in interviews people will say like, how comfortable are you teaching math, and people will be like, not at all. And I try to like tell people in the hiring committee like that shouldn't be a red flag, because I would have said the same thing. I typically try to ask a follow-up of like, okay, but like, are you willing to learn and willing to try new things? And if someone says yes to that, then the first answer isn't really a problem to me. But yeah, definitely when I first started, if they had said, how are you with math? I would have been like, horrible. I took the bare minimum 2 classes I had to take in college and never looked back, and, never, I don't know, in one sense, I feel like I can connect with students pretty deeply in a real authentic way when teaching math, because I can be like, hey, I understand this is weird and it's confusing, and even I'll make mistakes on it. And it sort of levels the relationship with the students sometimes. Because I don't consider myself an expert. I consider myself just someone sort of facilitating instruction. But yeah, definitely. I sort of actually in Albany, there's sort of like, with those people, there's a joke because that idea of like, I'm not a math person, you're trying to chip away at that a little, that like we're all doing math all the time. In fact, New York, if you have to go to a meeting on like, the Upper East Side of Manhattan, if you're going to get there on time, you have to be able to do math.
This interview will continue in part 2 of this episode. Thank you for listening to the Nadia podcast.